You've been. Thanks, Laura. Welcome back, everybody. I recognize some names and faces here. Really great to have you back. Those of you who haven't been here, let me just take a moment to introduce myself and also Actus. So my name's Lucinda. I've been many years in organisational learning and development roles, and actually it was pretty much organisational development was what I was involved in. So some of what I'm discussing is things that I've had experience in. Don't worry, Glenn, no problem with no camera on mic. Hopefully you can hear me and see. And also, let me just preempt a typically asked question. We will be recording this and we will send you a link to the recording later on today or first thing tomorrow. And we will also send you the slides as well as a PDF. So don't worry about anything there. Now, thank you, Glenn, for kicking off the chat. What I do like to do is get people to perhaps just get interactive. So I try to make things interactive so you don't just feel talked at. So if you want to let me know where in the world you're from, what your interest is in this topic, if it's something you know about, because it is a little bit of an unusual topic or something that I find we do have, it has a lot of mystery around it, OD, I think. In fact, I remember when I first said, oh, I'm doing OD, this is 25 years ago, and people said, oh, what's that make you? I said, I called myself an OD consultant. And I said, well, that's an odd consultant. People didn't really even understand what OD stood for. So we are going to hopefully discuss that, and everyone will feel very comfortable knowing what OD is all about by the end of this subject. But some of you may already be experts. So I'm going to pop up a poll as well, because I thought it might actually lend itself to this. And my polls have just moved to a different part here. So I'm going to launch this as a poll just to find out what interests you about this topic, what's brought you here. So you can select one or many of those options that are available to you. And equally, in the meeting chat, I've introduced myself here. Let me know, who you are, where you're from, and other people here, because we do find that people use the chat. They often share useful information, and it can be a really valuable way of almost using a webinar as a networking opportunity. So while that's all happening, I'm also going to introduce you to Actus, for those of you who are new here. So I'm CEO of Actus. Actus is our complete performance, talent and learning management suite. And actually something like Actus software is often something that's used almost as an organisational development tool. So that's part of what's interesting here. So you can use something, a software, not just our software, any software could be something that's part of an OD intervention. Other things that Actus also offers is 360-degree feedback, and we've got some offers and things on this later that I'll mention at the end. But if you're thinking about something like OD in your organisation, you can use 360-degree feedback as one of the tools. And we've got a series of management booster training sessions. All of these could fall into learning and development or could fall into OD. So that's enough of the sales pitch. We'll give you the opportunity to talk further about any of those, should you wish. And this is also giving you all a chance to say hello to us in the chat. So that's brilliant. So great to know, yeah, you're on the edge of OD and want to be more involved. It's such an interesting topic. I think it's a really great strategic way to be involved. So I'll keep an eye on those chats. Don't be shy. Do feel free to chat away. So it's also given a few extra people chance to join us here. So what I'm going to cover in this webinar is I'm going to talk about why we're kind of rethinking or redefining OD. I've got some personal thoughts on this, maybe contentious. We'll see what you think about this. I'm going to explain why I think organisational development is so relevant to us in organisations. We'll look at what a process might be for an OD intervention if you were doing something like this. I'll mention the Burke-Litwin model, which I think is a really fascinating and useful model that you could perhaps find out more about should you wish to, and just really how we can do more about OD. So I hope you'll find this, in terms of rethinking this, to be an interesting and valuable webinar subject. Let's just end the poll here, and so everyone had a chance to let's see what we've got here. So it looks like we've got some experts here, no practitioners here. Brilliant. Do feel free to be chatting in here, suggesting things. I'm not saying that I know everything about this topic. A number of you also have OD, but it's not your main role. Interestingly, this might link to what we talk about later. If you are someone who's selected, you've got responsibility, but it's not your main role, just perhaps in the chat, if you don't mind, let us know what your main role is. Is it HR or learning and development, or something completely different? Okay, so brilliant. Let me stop sharing that and let's crack on. So first of all, let's think about how we might define OD. And I go to the two experts for us in our sort of profession and an HR point of view. So the CIPD define it as a planned and systematic approach to enabling sustained organisational performance through the involvement of its people. So organisational development, it's all about organisational performance through people. And then Roffey Park, and actually, if you do want to know more about this, I think Roffey Park is one of the, I once went on an OD day there, actually. It was really interesting. So they do some good training there on this topic. I'd see them as experts in it. And I've done a podcast episode with the guy who heads up OD there as well, which is quite a good one if you want to know more about this topic. And my colleague Laura will probably pop links to all our OD podcasts in the chat if you're not familiar with the HR Uprising podcast that I host. So organisational development, it's the work of facilitating organisational success by aligning structural, cultural and strategic realities of work to respond to the needs of an ever-evolving business climate. Nothing if not succinct. They are, aren't they, Harriet? Yeah, I think it's a really great place to find out more about it. And for me, just more simplistically, I would say it's about evolving, adapting, or improving an organisation in line with strategic goals. And obviously that does involve people activities. The key really we're talking about is something that is quite strategic. And again, that's why I think it's so important for us. I think many of you are in OD or HR roles. It's important for us to be strategic, which is why OD does fit in very much. But it is a strategic thing. All of those definitions are talking about something which is about organisational performance. It's about being a little bit more long-term in terms of this, so driving change through. So I've then got a follow-up question or reflection for you. If I was to say in an organisation, so some of you, that's what I was asking earlier, those of you who've got OD in your organisation, but it's not your main role, where do you think it should fit? Where should OD fit in your opinion? And I'm going to give you another option to do it easily because I've just done another poll for you to tell me what you think. And this is something that there's not a right or wrong answer to this, okay? I'm just curious. So where do you think organisational development ought to fit in an organisation? And let's see what your thoughts are on this and what your rationale might be. Okay, so you can definitely see that. It's quite interesting actually, because you have at the moment the majority, I'll share in a moment, give everyone a chance to go for it. Fabulous. Okay. Interestingly, I agree with the majority here, but this is just my opinion. So what I feel is, because it is a strategic role, organisational development, I feel there's an argument that HR should be part of it, learning and development should be part of it, talent management should be part of it, change should be part of it. However, in reality, in most organisations currently, and correct me if it's different for you, is it often sits as part of HR, most commonly as part of HR, so sort of underneath HR. And I think because it is such a strategic role, and there are things within HR which are strategic and tactical, it almost feels like it should be above it, in my opinion. And actually, quite a number of you think that as well. So although you think that, and then there's the other option for it being on its own. So I remember there's things like business improvement in the organisation I used to work with. There are other things where people might do lean activities. So they're actually shifting processes or process improvement. You could argue that that's organisational development as well, although it's more commonly fitting in the HR area. So Nick's going, none of the above you choose on own, but at exec level. The bottom line is absolutely, it is a strategic role. It needs to have the opportunity, whoever's owning it or whoever's involved in it, you need to understand what the strategic goals are for the organisation in order to be able to support the organisation in this OD role. So many of you might be someone who's got OD as part of your title, but you sit within HR, and it is interesting. So the challenge for you is to make sure you get an insight enough to the actual strategy there. Great. So, and your organisation's got a people and organisation development directorate, so sit side by side, and you would want to work quite closely as well, wouldn't you? So as we go through this, I will look at areas where we might kind of go, what's OD, what's HR, what's L&D, because I think that's something that people can find quite confusing. So if you were to think, let's just tell me in the chat before I go into my next slide, what fits within organisational development in your experience? So Annette's saying, for example, business change. So I definitely would say change management can sit within organisational development. What other things would you say would be OD? If someone was doing OD, what would you say? I'll give you a few moments to think. Absolutely, Ali said culture. So culture change for me, that would be an OD activity. Again, it might be given responsibility to someone in HR, but certainly that would be something I would agree with. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Yeah. So we've got performance, we've got quality and governance. And this is interesting because there isn't a right answer as such. So it's what do we think is the right thing? I'm going to pop my slide up and we can discuss it through and see if anyone's got anything additional. So certainly for me, in terms of organisational development, I would see that those are things. So culture and change is one on my slide here. I'd also think something like organisational structure and design. So if you're rethinking workforce planning, you would want to make sure that the structure is aligned with what you're trying to achieve in the organisation. Thinking about things like leadership and management systems and processes aligned with that. So things like performance that Alice has put here so performance management would sit there, because that could be something that is going to drive culture or behaviours in certain ways. It might impact reward, for example. Strategic talent management, so making sure we've got the right skills aligned with our organisation and where we're wanting to go as an organisation. We're talking about evidence-based practice. That's, again, evidence-based HR, absolutely, but you would want to make sure you're using evidence-based practice in terms of OD, and continuous improvement and learning. And I think that maybe links with the quality and governance type thing. So those would be topics that I would feel, some of them you could Venn diagram, where it's HR, where it's learning development, where it's OD, but a lot of those for me feel like organisational development topics. Yes, Emily, I think that's quite a tricky one, to be honest. So someone's asking, Alice is asking, does anyone place behaviours under OD? Are you talking sort of competencies? What do you mean by that, Alice? Perhaps write a little bit more if you don't mind in the chat, and we can come back to that. So while the chat's going, do feel free to keep the conversation going. So for me, examples of organisational development might be, and I've taken this from Roffey Park, so this is from expert guidance. It might be something where we're looking at changes to the structure, culture, strategy and processes of an individual's job or through the whole organisation. It's applying behavioural science knowledge, but it's kind of psychology knowledge, and the practice to facilitate transformation. So that's a long-winded way of saying transformation for change, really, but evidence-based change. It's about improving organisational effectiveness, so it's having that purpose of it. So you might involve people to understand what's making the organisation, or what could make the organisation more effective. So you might be doing some diagnosis, maybe through focus groups or things, enabling people to have new skills, knowledge and ways of thinking. The promotion of high productivity performance practice, it could be quality products, financial performance and continuous improvement. So there you've got continuous improvement. So the business I used to sit in had a separate section for continuous improvement, and it was completely unrelated to anything to do with OD or to HR. The promotion of, the facilitation of change in a flexible, adaptive and often participative way, so involving people in change, and sustainability, so making sure that there's consistent change in the right direction. So effectively, not just doing change initiatives, it's strategic, it's making sure the impact happens. So just checking the behaviours linked to priorities and performance, values and behaviours part of OD in relation to culture. So let's say values and behaviours, including behavioural framework, sits under OD. So in terms of, so as in someone, I still don't know if I totally understand the question there. So would you see something like behaviours, if you're trying to, if you're defining behaviours, would you have behaviours around organisational development? You could, in terms of competence for an HR or an OD professional. If you're talking about, I think values frameworks or competency frameworks, I don't know whether I took that under OD. I think changing them might be, and in fact I have got I think maybe also defining a values framework to align with strategic requirements. If you were defining a behavioural framework for the organisation, I think that activity would feel like organisational development, but then implementing it or measuring behaviours on an ongoing basis against it, or measuring performance against it, that would feel more like an HR process, and maybe developing skills against it would be more learning and development. So some of these are quite grey. It doesn't matter ultimately, we shouldn't get too hung up on it, but it is a great question. So terms that might fit within organisational development: positive psychology, the cultural web, complexity, competency frameworks, which is perhaps your behaviours piece here, Burke-Litwin, which we'll talk to later, appreciative inquiry, talent planning. So these all could fit as organisational development practices that we might do, and we might have an HR role, that might be our job, but those all sit within it. So ultimately, things like if you were doing something like World Cafe or gathering information, all those sorts of things can also fit in. So if you want to carry out an organisational development intervention in your organisation, there's no point in doing it unless, of course, there is a requirement, because it's a strategic requirement for you. So you would need to, have our finger on the pulse of the business. You'd need to identify what the requirements are where we might need to do something. So thinking about why we might need to, create a new approach to performance. We might want to create a high performance culture. We might see that there's a problem currently in the organisation where perhaps there's lots of issues with underperformance, or HR are continually getting hassled by their managers saying, I've got an underperformer in my organisation. So you might actually think, we've got an issue here with our culture around performance. So you might look at a holistic way in which you could address that issue. So you might think, well, actually, we need to give some managers some training. We might want to put in a new process which rewards high performance. We might have, might want to change a policy to do with performance. So there's lots and lots of different ways in which you might think, how might we address this need? Select one or many of those, implement the plan. I mean, this is the case generally in any of these sort of interventions, and then evaluate the impact, and of course, circle back. So I think the key here is we're thinking more broadly than just what someone might come to you and say, I need some training in managing underperformance for my managers. And we might just deliver that. Or we might go, actually, is this part of a bigger problem? Is there something else that we might need to do? So in terms of this. And so this is where something like the Burke-Litwin model could be something that we might choose to apply to our organisation. So if you wanted to come up with an organisational development strategy, this could be something that you would think about. So just giving you a chance, if any of you've seen this before, I'm not sure if you have or not. So let's have a look, and let me just walk you through it. So you can see the blue bit's basically the outside of it here. So the external environment, this is something which Burke and Litwin, who came up with this model in 1992, they really think that it's a leadership change model in many ways, but it's a great way for diagnosing how effective we are as an organisation and potentially pinpointing where issues may arise from. And in theory, any one of those, because it is a bit of a web, can impact others. But they felt that the external environment can be one of the most impactful areas of it. So it almost ranks them from the top down. So all of the factors are integrated to a greater or lesser degree, and they will affect each other's. So if you want to think about something like a driver for change, the external environment is going to have an impact. But then if we go the next level down, if we have declare our mission and our strategy for the business, it's going to be impacted by how the leaders behave and whether they model those behaviours against it. And that in turn is going to impact your organisational culture. And we all know, actually, if you've done anything on culture, that leadership makes a massive difference to that. But all those things link up, or they sort of feed each other. And then if you went down, so your leadership behaviours and your organisational culture are going to be reflected in your management practices. Management practices are going to be impacted by systems and policies. So, going back to my example about high performance or low performance, have you got systems in to encourage high performance or not? Have you got the right policies that support things? It could link into something like reward and recognition. So people might put in place performance related pay, for example, that they believe that their reason for doing that might be to encourage high performance. That doesn't work for everyone, especially in the public sector, for example. So they might want to have other policies about how we can encourage high performance and make it more cultural, modelled by the leaders. I talked about things like 360 feedback. You might want to look at behaviors of your leaders and encourage and develop them in line with high performance practices. Your structure is going to make a difference to this. And then just the overall work climate, kind of how it feels to be here, all of those linked together. So all of those sort of facets of something, if I was thinking, how am I going to change this organization? It is about thinking more broadly than just, I'm going to go in tactically and do an intervention on some training. So thinking broadly how it all fits together. And these things, of course, are then going to impact, the climate, the environment at work. That's going to, if you've got an engagement issue, that's going to affect people's motivation, levels of engagement, their needs and values, and also just the roles of the job. So all these things feed together into driving individual and organizational performance. So you could do this if you wanted to take this model, and you could almost diagnose your organization, but generally you want to almost do it in line with a need that you think you've got, and apply it there and think what works. It's almost what's good and what could be better about my organization in this area. And you might find that there are things that pull against each other that perhaps are undermining them. For example, the easy one is to say something like management practices. Let's say leaders are saying behave in a certain way and then they're modeling different behaviors. Or you've got old systems and policies that are at odds with what you're trying to achieve. So they're slightly undermining the culture that you're trying to generate. So it's quite an interesting thing almost to do a sort of gap analysis on your own organization, just in relation to those things. So you can Google it and read much more about it. It's reasonably complex, but actually when I said the Roughy Park, we spent the whole day on this model at Roughy Park, and I thought it was really, really useful. So Laura's just popped an infographic in there on Booklet, which you can access to read more about it should you wish. So then moving on, as I was sort of saying earlier, we've got quite an interesting chat going on about, is it about direction of travel? Yes, I agree, Harriet. I think there is something about direction of travel. It's this whole concept that organisational development should be aligned with organisation strategy. Now, to be honest, so HR and L&D should also be strategic, but there's lots more transactional, tactical stuff that has to happen on the way. So I tried to distinguish them here. And again, this is not black and white. There are definitely shades of grey. It's definitely a sort of Venn diagram thing going on, but this is my definition of what I think the difference is between OD/HR, learning and development. And feel free to disagree with me, is my best shot at it. So I would say if I was doing organisational development, I might diagnose and define the new skills that we need in the organisation to support a business strategy. So we've got a change in business strategy. We might look, what gaps have we got in terms of skills in this organisation? And then if I'm in HR, I might be recruiting people in line with those new skills. Learning and development, I might be training people in those skills. So the definition and diagnosis for me is OD, and then the fulfillment of it in this situation is HR, learning and development. Facilitating, OD would be facilitating the definition of values or strategic goals that are going to be cascaded. So helping the organisation establish where it's going, thinking what those values might be, thinking what strategic goals we might need. You might do the facilitation and be a facilitator in your organisation. For me, that feels quite like an OD skill or task, but then embedding them and monitoring performance management, the process once you've defined it, would fit into business as usual, HR type activities. Defining what the new behaviours are that you need to support culture change, and then implementing training. So that's similar to the one we've just talked about. I'm talking about working with others to define the look of a new structure or way of working. That's one way of doing it in terms of how you might, the actual sort of facilitation, the collaboration activity of it. So again, it's that definition. But then if you've got to negotiate with trade unions or anything like that, then that's much more doing the job, getting the hands on. So it's almost implementing it, making it happen. So this is more definition. I'll let you read the rest of those yourselves. But then making it happen, embedding it, delivering it would often fit into the roles of others. And again, this is where I think, and many of us all thought, that's why you can see that maybe OD sits in a sort of a strategic position, and you need the other functions to deliver against it, basically, to make things happen. And that's one of the interesting things when you think about change. Quite often change in organizations doesn't happen because it's not followed through. So you can define the change, or you might get consultants to come in and define what needs to happen, but then embedding it and delivering it, everybody's got to line up and it's got to have follow through. So you need all aspects of it. One is not superior, but yeah, you definitely pull it together. Harriet, you're great in analogies. Harriet says it's like architecture versus windows and curtains. Very good. I like that a lot. We'll have to borrow it. So let's keep moving on here. So hopefully this is useful for you to have a think about it. So if you want to be more OD focused yourself, because we have got multiple other roles potentially, then what I would say is, if you are in an operational role, think about, is this operational activity serving the long-term strategy? Because sometimes things go against each other. Are you balancing your short-term requirements with longer-term benefits? So again, if you are, I don't know if any of you here are HR departments of one, which is often challenging. So you have many, many hats on. That can be quite hard to jump between strategic long-term and sort of shorter-term tactical. You often get stuck in the short term. So trying to maybe block some time out for you to think bigger picture, to make sure that the whole strategy lines up. Make sure that all activities within it are aligned with the business strategy. Just always think, is this driving the strategy in the right place? And you know what, if your organizational strategy is not well defined, which is more common than you might think, if people don't know what it is, maybe that's an OD activity in itself, actually going, how are we going to define this? Making sure that people know where the organization is going and giving that definition. Thinking about, it's about the direction of travel, as somebody said earlier at the chat. Absolutely. Yeah, Harriet. So this direction of travel, OD suggests movement towards. So I think this is it. Have we got structures and processes that are future-proofed? Are they fit for the future? Or could they be more so? In terms of change and helping people buy into things, make sure people understand why things are important. Again, this aligns with business structure. Why have we got this business strategy? Why are we implementing management training? Why should you, complete this new process? If people understand the bigger picture, they're much more likely to buy into it. And this is parts of change. Thinking about culture. Have you got a culture that's supporting the right behaviours? I mean, for me, engagement, lots of you will have engagement surveys. Nothing wrong with that at all, but it's really kind of the tip of the iceberg for me. All that's doing is measuring what's already happening. What we need to think about is why is our engagement survey at this level, high or low, and how do we drive increased engagement? So that's where you're thinking about there in terms of the culture. And just think about, look for evidence, maybe do some analysis, take something like Berkeley model and apply it in your organization, and just see what evidence you've got about culture, about leadership behaviors, and those sort of things. Can it be really helpful for you? So those are the key topics that I wanted to cover in here. What I was going to do is, anyone has any questions, feel free to talk further about those. And feel free to put those in the chat, or even unmute if you want to. But those for me were the key things that I think are quite helpful. It's quite a synopsis of OD, but we've got quite a lot of other resources. So my colleague Laura's linked, I think she's already put the HR Uprising. I've done quite a lot on this topic where I go into Berkeley in more detail. And if you've got further questions or otherwise, do feel free to put them in the chat. Just while I give everybody a chance to do that if they wish, I'm just going to let you know what future webinars are coming up. We do one every month, so you can absolutely do sign up for those. Hopefully, if you got here in the first place, you'll be able to find those in future. And I'm also just going to pop another little poll up for if anyone wants further information on anything. So, and hopefully you can, is it going to let me do it? Zoom is a bit strange. Sometimes it won't always let you. It says I've already launched one. I was going to just I wanted to get some feedback on there, and it's not going to let me do it. Fine. Okay, so what I was going to do, thanks, Harriet. Thank you for your additions there. If anyone wants us to follow up on anything, wants further information, just messages. You've obviously got our emails. My colleague Laura will send an email out to you later. But just as a reminder, is a little bit of a plug, but actually these things could be part of your OD strategy. So if you identified that you had an issue with performance in your organisation, we do some management booster sessions. They would be tactical learning and development, but it could be part of an OD strategy. So this is a new thing that we're launching because we found that it's an area that lots of organisations are challenged by. Do feel free to get in contact with that with something new. And we've also got an offer on Actus 360 now. Lots of people are unsure about 360 feedback, what to use it for, maybe a bit nervous about it. So we've got, and if you wanted to have your own 360 feedback, we've got a standard version of it. You could experience it and we'd give you some feedback on it. So that's an offer that we've got going at the moment. So should you want to know more about any of these things, links will be in the email that's coming out to you. Just get in touch or respond to Laura and we'd be more than happy to jump on a call. Thank you so much for joining. I think we've also got and we've also got a white paper which has got that table on it, so you can refer back to it. And as I say, you'll get the slides. So apologies to those who joined late. You'll have to watch the recording. But here you go. Thank you very much for joining, everybody. Really pleased to have you here. And do keep coming back. And thank you very much for the feedback, Annette. That's really kind.